Growing up with an older brother meant that my introduction to video games was primarily a second-hand experience. Sometimes that meant losing at multiplayer games like Super Smash Bros., begging for a turn whenever he lost in Banjo-Kazooie, or printing off game fact tips from 2 rooms over while he tried to figure out the enigma that was Majora's Mask. That's just how things work when you are the younger sibling. He gets to go on the adventure, and I tag along as the flying support robot in Jet Force Gemini. He gets the officially licensed Nintendo controller, and I'm stuck with the Mad Catz Abomination with a control stick that drifts to the right ever so slightly. That all changed when the Fire version attacked. And of course, I'm talking about the fire that came from Pokémon Red version for the Game Boy Color. My god, having my brother come over and show me that his flaming tail lizard evolved into an even cooler flaming tail lizard felt like a cathartic turning point in my young life. I knew then that I was going to do whatever it took to go on my own Pokemon adventure.
Pikachu.
And so on my birthday, I strutted into our local Toys R Us just a naive little boy. But when I came out with my very own Game Boy Color and a copy of Pokemon Blue, I felt like I had just graduated from the Mulan School of Becoming a Man. I played and replayed Pokemon Blue so many times that I could have beaten that game blindfolded. I fell in love with Pokemon Blue version, and that love continued to carry me through each of the Pokemon generations as I continued to play not only the mainline adventures, but even the quirky and ridiculous spin-offs like Pokemon Snap, Mystery Dungeon, and whatever the hell this is. It wasn't until the end of the Nintendo DS era where my love affair with Pikachu and friends started to lose steam. I wouldn't say that the games dipped in quality or anything like that, I just kept on reaching the same state every time I picked up the latest Pokemon adventure where I would say to myself, alright, well, I've done this before. But in spite of my waning interest, the games were huge successes, both critically and financially, so maybe my gaming tastes had just naturally grown away from Pokemon. That was, of course, until Pokemon Sword and Shield arrived on the scene. Controversy after controversy, criticism after criticism, and although I didn't necessarily agree with all of the hubbubaloo, even though I did find much of it very entertaining, it felt reassuring to know that maybe it wasn't only me who was not exactly thrilled with the direction the franchise had taken. It's because of this rain cloud of negativity overshadowing the lead up to Pokemon Sword and Shield that I felt like I had a pretty decent grasp of what to expect this time around.
It's 68 degrees, and there's a 30% chance that it's already raining.
I was prepared to be disappointed by Dexgate, battle animations, environmental textures, Dynamaxing, all of the controversies, but now that I'm at the end of my 30-hour journey through the Galar region, I can confidently say that none of those things significantly mattered to my enjoyment. Don't get me wrong, Pokemon Sword and Shield do make weird and argument-inducing decisions, but it's the fundamentals of the gameplay experience that do the most harm. It's what we didn't see and what we weren't talking about that I believe tell the real story of Pokemon Sword and Shield. Let me start off by saying that my goal here is not to add to the cacophony of oftentimes extreme hatred towards these games. This isn't a long-winded tirade on why Game Freak sucks or why a Pokemon game without Surskit is objectively wrong and should be illegal. Spoilers, it is and it should. There's actually quite a lot that I liked about Sword and Shield, some of which directly contradict the controversies. Pokemon Sword and Shield was the first mainline Pokemon experience that I had that was actually able to tap into the wondrous childlike spirit from the anime. I felt like Ash on one of his many adventures thanks to the removal of random encounters as we've come to know them. You don't have to roll the die anymore and wonder whether or not you'll make a new discovery or run into yet another Yungoos. You just immediately see 5 Sparta balls marching across the path ahead and the excitement kicks in. What the heck was that? I wonder what type it has. If a piece of coal can evolve into a frickin' car, what about these walking helmets? And part of why this new way to discover Pokemon works so well is how they look. Okay, yes, compared to other top-of-the-line Switch titles, there's nothing particularly remarkable about Sword and Shield's graphical and artistic performance. But what the games lack in detail, they make up for with design. The new Generation 8 inductees are some of the most memorable Pokemon designs in recent memory. Additions like Wooloo and Yamper are so simple yet distinct that they immediately feel like instant classics. There's just something weirdly compelling about taking a familiar touchstone like a Corgi and then gracefully imagining what it would be like as a Pokemon. Oh, you could change toy? You can fetch. Go get it, Yampy. Go get it, buddy. Turning the average Pokemon interaction from a contrived low-res RPG trope into a scene straight from the anime is enough of an improvement to make me dread going back to play the older titles. But thankfully, Sword and Shield delivers plenty of other quality of life upgrades to keep my 3DS on the shelf collecting dust where it belongs, including automatic XP share, remote access to your Pokemon storage, the ability to skip over some tutorial sections, pretty much removing random encounters like in the Let's Go games, gaining XP from catching Pokemon, also like in the Let's Go games, and being able to do this whenever you want. There he goes. It just keeps on going. Yep. Pokemon Sword and Shield, everyone. I think it's fair to say that Pokemon Sword and Shield are at their best when they are actively trying to improve or differentiate themselves from the status quo. Unfortunately, as can be said with the majority of mainline Pokemon titles, most of the changes Sword and Shield bring to the table barely scratch the surface when it comes to revitalizing the tried and true 20-plus-year-old formula. Combat in Sword and Shield is combat in Sun and Moon, is combat in Black and White, is combat in Red and Blue, with a few minor tweaks here and there. 6 Pokemon, 4 moves, constantly asking yourself which type beats what other type. It's a primitive system that ironically refuses to evolve, but like the old saying goes, if it ain't broke. But the thing is, the combat is broken, or at the very minimum, misused, and has been for quite some time now.
So, who broke it? I'm not mad, I just want to know.
The combat in Pokemon games only really gel during the high-stake moments. I'm talking about the points in the game where your opponent not only has a threatening party combination, but is also willing to use them effectively. That's when you are forced out of your usual groove of non-stop spamming Hydro Pump and actually have to think, plan, and adapt to the situation. It's proof that the system can work, but like I said, it doesn't work because Pokemon titles have held on for dear life to the old school JRPG mindset that 95% of the game should be filled with repetitive, snooze-fest filler battles which encourage very little thought. It almost never feels like a fair fight when even 3/4 into the game I'm running into trainers who refuse to max out their Pokemon count, stick to 1 or 2 types, select suboptimal moves, and can't use more than 1 item throughout the entire match. The result is a system which barely has to be paid attention to. Battle the A button. Okay, how much can I press it? Yep. Just gotta know when to switch to the B button, which is here, and then you go straight back to the A button. There are exceptions to this, but that's exactly what they are, exceptions. If you have to wait for key story moments or endgame content to fully enjoy the thrill of the battle system, then what are we really doing here? And when the player is not invested in the main challenge that a game sets forth, all of the other mechanics become markedly unappetizing. Why should I waste my time trying to catch a variety of Pokemon, strategically distributing TMs, and engaging in the new flashy content like raids, camps, and Pokejobs if I've never once lost the battle? Up until this point, I've been largely ignoring the principal upgrade Sword and Shield offers in hopes of spicing up the battle system, Dynamaxing. And the reason for this is because Dynamaxing also largely ignores the majority of battle encounters, almost to the point of irrelevancy. If your literal big gamble meant to shake things up is only accessible during key gameplay moments, and it doesn't make a difference 90% of the time, then it doesn't make a difference 90% of the time. And even on the off chance that you are in a potential Dynamax situation, Dynamaxing somehow makes each battle less technically interesting by replacing a nuanced moveset with generic fire attack 01 and generic flying attack 02. But hey, at least the Pokemon get really big. That's something, right? It almost feels like a joke at this point for Game Freak to proudly introduce the latest marquee mechanic that's supposed to revolutionize the Pokemon combat experience, but then it winds up doing very little and is casually forgotten in time for the next release.
This is the way.
This is the way.
This is the way.
Although Dynamaxing will likely follow in the footsteps of Z-moves and Mega Evolutions before it, Sword and Shield are still able to leave a lasting mark on the franchise with its introduction of the Wild Area. With all types of Pokemon to catch and train against, raids to conquer, items to buy, berries to collect, landmarks to visit, minigames to fool around in, and other players to interact with, all located in an unrestricted free-roaming landmass viewable with a complete 360 camera, I felt like I finally had the agency to personally tailor my Pokemon experience in the same way I typically expect from other open-world titles. The Wild Area is truly a glance into the future of Pokemon, but that's also precisely where it ends. It's a taste, a tech demo for what could possibly be achieved without fully sealing the deal. The things you can do start off by leaving a great first impression, but don't end up having a lot of depth after the fact. It's a thrill to encounter Pokemon that are attractively overpowered, until you realize that you are not allowed to catch them without the appropriate gym badges. You can't use the Great Ball, it won't let its guard down. What the f does that even mean? Okay, I can't use the Great Ball and I can't get away, so I just have to die? What the? It's refreshing to be let loose on an open, explorable area until you realize that the environments all kind of look the same with very little detail in the textures or general design. Raids can be frustrating, simplistic, and difficult to coordinate. Cooking takes too long and is annoyingly repetitive. The main story doesn't even require you to meaningfully interact with the wild area whatsoever. It's just kind of like, well, here it is, but don't forget to come back to the real game when you're done. And connecting online with other players simply plops their hologram into your world with almost no impact other than making the game lag. This unmistakable feeling that the game lacks depth or polish beyond the surface level is a common theme throughout the Sword and Shield experience. The Galar region as a whole tries to sell itself as an engaging take of what a Pokemon world might look like in an English setting with the added emphasis of a major World Cup-like event. It's desperate to elevate the stakes and convince you that you are participating in a sporting tournament with endorsements, massive stadiums, Poké mascots, live broadcasts, referees, uniforms, local crowds, and even trading cards. But don't let this fool you. There's nothing inherently special about the gameplay that couldn't have happened in any other Pokemon region with any other premise. What do they eat for breakfast every morning? Curry omelet. Omelets, man. Really? Really? It's especially disappointing considering how cool it would have been if a Pokemon game actually ran like a tournament where you had to earn endorsements and qualify for major milestones instead of just looking like you do. The rest of the region is as hollow as it gets, with cookie-cutter towns that offer nothing more than being visually distinct and having the occasional historical landmark. It doesn't matter if you're in Wedgehurst or Hammerlock, each town can usually be simplified to a few key offerings like a Poké Center, Battle Cafe, and shops to change your clothes or fix your hair. And in some areas like Spikemuth, they can't even offer you that. It's easy to pick on Spikemuth since it's less of a town and more like a row of garages being used as a disguise for even more filler Pokemon battles. Apartments and homes share the same layout and furniture, oftentimes down to the exact 3D model, which is even less forgivable when the copy-pasting happens with NPCs that are standing right next to each other. Speaking of which, the world is chock full of NPCs with heads as empty as the region they live in. They lounge around, staring at storage containers and spouting nonsense that's never interesting, like your Pokemon is reliable.
Nobody cares, Sean. Nobody cares.
It's rare if a town includes something to truly differentiate itself like a hotel or restaurant, but the implementation winds up being just as lazy. Here's a massive luxury hotel where you can only access the lobby. Here's a restaurant where the chef begs you not to leave without getting a bite to eat and then offers no way to actually get a bite to eat. These shallow and antiquated aspects of Sword and Shield stick out for a game released in 2019. Like how there's no voice acting in spite of the game insisting that there should be multiple moments where fully animated characters sing. Alright, there's nothing more awkward than watching someone sing without any voice. Or how the low draw distances are shockingly noticeable. The lack of substance and overall world polish is surprising even by Pokemon standards. When you're not picking at the skeletal husk that is Sword and Shield's region, the game tasks you with the familiar goal of taking Leon's place as the battling champion of Galar. Being the best that ever was has traditionally been a part of the Pokemon DNA, but Sword and Shield attempts to elevate this motivation by turning it into a cornerstone of the game's main plot. It's a strange move, considering how uninteresting a story becomes when the majority of the characters share the same motivation and when that motivation is so uninspired. One character wants to be the best, but his brother is already the best. Another character wants to be the best, but comes from a privileged background. Another character wants to be the best, but comes from a less privileged background. And you can't forget the character who wants to remain the best because he's already the best. And where do you fit in all of this? You play the role of a character who wants to be the best, but funnily enough has no background or reason to be.
You come from nothing. You're nothing.
Sword and Shield constantly interrupts you with a merry-go-round of characters who love to remind you that you are their rival, or that they want to win, or how you don't deserve to win, or that they could crush you if they were trying harder. Hop is an insufferable, one-dimensional toddler who says things like, "Fill in another page in the tale of my legend." Like, alright guy, just relax. He also regularly challenges you to physical foot races, as in, I challenge you to get to that building over there before I do. You know, the type of thing that you would expect from a 7-year-old. Bede is a jerk, and Marnie is shockingly chill at first, until you realize that she's just as obsessed about winning the tournament and has a psycho fan base that will do whatever it takes to help her secure that. Despite how hard Sword and Shield tried to tell me that I should deeply care about winning or about these rivalries with other characters, I didn't.
How was that? That wasn't good.
Yeah, you can do better.
Because at the end of the day, the game does none of the groundwork necessary to tell an actual story. It throws you in there and expects you to be as deranged as Hop or Bede just because it says so. It doesn't work because as much as Sword and Shield might not want to admit it, this isn't your story at all. You play the background character in everyone else's story.
It's good.
Nothing showcases this more than with the game's subplot about the mysterious history of the Galar region and a suspicious chairman who may or may not want to abuse that power. Spoilers, he totally does. Alright, it's not groundbreaking, but it is far more interesting than the main plot about an average dude who just woke up one day and felt like winning a tournament. Unfortunately, your friend Sonia is the one tasked with unraveling these legendary secrets so as to not get in the way of your far more important quest to win the thing. But Sword and Shield still wants you to know about Sonia's journey, so it will inexplicably make up excuses for you two to briefly cross paths so that she can barf exposition at you and then quickly remind you to scurry your butt to the next gym because it's been far too long since your last Pokemon battle. Remember that restaurant I mentioned earlier? It was actually part of a cutscene that plays out like this. You enter Hulbury and the chairman's assistant invites you to dinner after you beat the gym. You beat the gym and you are greeted by the chairman and Sonia at the restaurant, who proceed to completely ignore you as they have their own side conversation relating to what Sonia's been looking into lately. Once you've heard everything Game Freak wanted to tell you, the chairman remarks that he has no time to talk to you, and then everyone leaves. But my favorite example that truly highlights the ridiculous lengths Sword and Shield go to involve you in someone else's story is in the game's climax. You and Hop are waiting for his brother Leon to eat dinner. Leon is late. Leon sends someone to specifically tell you that he is going to be late because he's in a meeting and that's okay. In a totally normal reaction to hearing this news, Hop suspects foul play and decides that we need to illegally break into a business complex and save his brother from the danger that he's somehow in thanks to being late for dinner. We steal the keys, break in, destroying the plants in the lobby along the way, while we battle every security guard in the building who are just trying to do their job. But remember, we are the heroes here. All of this just so that when we finally get to the meeting Leon was having with Chairman Rose, it winds up being entirely civil, and Leon was in no danger whatsoever. He casually glances at us and says he'll be ready for dinner soon and asks us to meet him back down at the hotel where all of this started. This entire ludicrous break-in operation was concocted just to give the flimsiest of reasons imaginable for the player, the side character if you will, a reason to be 2 feet away from the main characters so that we can hear the chairman say something slightly ominous. That's it. And it's a real shame that Sword and Shield struggles so much to put together an alluring and digestible story, because an intriguing plot would have helped break up the monotonous pacing of the single-player campaign. The game forces you to stick to the traditional gym route structure more so than any Pokemon game that I can remember. It's as if someone heard that Ocarina of Time was an amazing game, but never got past Mido, that first dude who annoyingly blocks your way to the Great Deku Tree, and then thought to themselves, we should make an entire game filled with that guy. You go exactly where Sword and Shield wants you to go, and it wants to hurdle you from gym to gym and route to route without much in the way of variety besides cycling between random rival battles. Which I guess is alright, until you realize that gyms are just buildings where you have Pokemon battles, and routes are outdoor environments where you have Pokemon battles, and rivals are people who force you into having more Pokemon battles. Sure, there are a couple examples where the game makes you do something a tiny bit different, but these examples are so few and so brief that they're fairly inconsequential to the overall experience. And yes, I know that Pokemon games are, by and large, all about the Pokemon battles, but great games figure out how to keep you hooked by regularly diversifying how it doles up its main quest to create a fair sense of pacing. Nintendo has been doing this for decades. The original Legend of Zelda is all about exploration. Part of what you discover are these intimidating dungeons, which raise the tension by offering better loot while challenging the player with more difficult enemies, a confusing labyrinthian layout, and an eerie soundtrack. Once you beat a dungeon, you're kicked back into the world and encouraged to take your time. Find some secret bushes and let that tension cool off a little bit before making your way to the next dungeon. The game expertly allows you to formulate your own roller coaster type pacing to always keep the experience fresh. Pokémon Sword and Shield, on the other hand, will shepherd you directly to the next gym, sometimes literally, as NPCs offer to walk you to the stadium entrance, ask you to have your high-tension, dungeon-like moment by defeating the leader, and then a minute later force you to face off against another equally challenging battle with one of your rivals. What's funny is that there are actually multiple points in the story where it would have been an awesome opportunity to shake things up, like when Leon and Sonia are saving Hammerlock from rogue Dynamax Pokemon, but the issue gets resolved almost immediately by other characters so as to not disrupt your tunnel vision goal of winning the dang tournament. I actually think the real culprit here is that Sword and Shield relies too heavily on the wild area to keep things from feeling repetitive. They want you to stop what you're doing and go fight in raids or cook some curry in order to serve up the variety instead of designing more unique situations into the main quest, like the Safari Zone or Team Rocket's hideout in Red and Blue. The problem with that is that the wild area lacks the depth to sustain the experience beyond nothing more than a fun conceptual experiment. So the result is what feels like two separate okay games instead of a single cohesive great one. The wild area being an alpha build of what an MMO/open world style Pokemon game could be like, while the rest of Sword and Shield is a full game that appears to have forgotten even the most basic tenets of good game design when it comes to variety and pacing. In some twisted and ironic way, Game Freak was right. The lack of a national Pokedex and mediocre fighting animations meant very little in my playthrough of Pokemon Sword and Shield. Sword and Shield doesn't struggle because you can't catch a Mudkip, but because it got so caught up in the extras like trading cards, curry making, and Dynamaxing that it forgot to nail the basics like the main quest, story, and combat system. It may pay to be a pretty collection of interesting ideas entirely held together by the insanely recognizable Pokemon branding, but that's not how you leave a legacy. And during the time when other JRPG favorites like Final Fantasy and Persona are breaking ground with generation-defining game releases, a time when Nintendo staples like Zelda, Mario, and Fire Emblem are completely reinventing themselves and their genres, it's sad to see my childhood favorites spin its wheels in comparison. The Pokemon franchise needs to do more than simply inch forward with peripheral improvements, some of which get tossed in time for the next game in the series to release anyway. The Pokemon franchise needs to evolve.